It was a typical day at my home in St. Louis City. I was there with my four siblings as both of my parents were away, out doing their daily business. Our Aunt Joyce had come that day just as she always had when my parents were both out, intently watching us as we played with our toys and video games. She would also play with us. She would come over about 3 or 4 times every week, every time my parents left to watch us. She was always very fun to be around. At this particular time in my life, I was about 10 years old and too short to reach the mantel where I liked to stash my belongings, which included mainly toys and allowance money. In order to reach this height, I would climb onto the couch that was positioned in front of it and stand on the back. I wasn't supposed to do this. My mom had told me not to repeatedly, and I knew every time I did that I was disobeying. But that didn't usually stop me, and I would regularly disobey in order to reach the top of the shelf. On that morning many years ago, I was once again considering to climb onto the top of the couch to reach my things on the top of the mantel. But this time, I could sense something wasn't right. Before carrying through with this, I thought to myself that it may not be a good idea to regularly disobey my parents like this. And I briefly thought to myself that I probably shouldn't do it. But if I was to stop disobeying, I would probably have to have someone get all my stuff down for me so I could find a different place to put everything. If I did in fact get on top of the couch and disobey, I would be able to reach my belongings, get whatever it was that I wanted down, likely do so without injuring myself, and things would go much easier as opposed to the first option. It was in the heat of the moment, and I really needed to get one of my toys on the shelf. I simply didn't want to wait to devise a different plan, and within seconds, I was once again on top of the couch, reaching for my items. It took maybe 5 seconds for me to get the toy and start back down the couch again. But then it happened. I tripped and hit my head on the side of a surrounding chair. Before I knew it, I was sitting in a hospital room with my parents, who had rushed over after hearing of the unfortunate incident. I was treated with some numbing cream as I waited to get several stitches where I had hit the chair. It was not a pleasant experience. After returning from the hospital, I had to lie in bed and rest for several days. I burned through hours of movies, and I would hate to look in the mirror to see the stitches in my head. The decision I had made earlier that day was not a good one, and I knew it the moment I fell off the couch. Aside from the obvious of having to go to the hospital, there were several other consequences I was faced with at this point. For one, I had some pretty bad headaches for a while after the incident, which always seemed to emanate from the spot on the right side of my head where I had hit the chair. Also, I can imagine that the hospital bill was probably pretty high for something that wouldn't even have happened had I just done what I knew I should have. But looking back in hindsight, though, probably the biggest regret I have about that day was putting our beloved Aunt Joyce in such a traumatic position. It was she who rushed to my aid immediately after I fell. She was the one who told me what to do to get the bleeding to stop. After this day, however, she rarely came over to watch us, and I always blamed myself and the poor decision I had made for it. Looking back, though, I believe that God was able to teach me a valuable lesson that day. To always do what you know is right, even if you know it may not be as easy or simple as the alternative. After this, I would rarely ever disobey my parents during my childhood, as opposed to before, when I seemed to think nothing of it. Though there were some serious consequences to this sin, I can say that I was definitely able to learn from this experience and incorporate it into the way I behaved for years to come.